Alright everyone, it's time for the Occult, video number 374, Occult Nostalgia. This is something that I've actually seen myself firsthand, and to some degree, aesthetically speaking, it sort of makes sense. So the basic premise is that a lot of times people that are involved with studying or practicing any form of magic, they're interested in spirituality or whatever, they have a sort of nostalgia, or a preference rather, for things that happened long, long ago. So you would say, well, this document is closer to in the historical sense, it can make sense. This document is closer, more recent to something that happened than this analysis of that document from 300 years later. So you go to the original source and, depending on how superstitious the people that wrote it were and what their frame of mind was and how far removed they were from it, Tacitus, it could be more accurate potentially. But I see the same basic premise used for like grimoires and things like that. So you have someone that practices magic, let's say in the literal sense of high rituals and demon summoning and things like that, drawing their sigils and, doing their chants. They are probably more likely to be practicing from the Ars Goetia than they are from some grimoire that was written 50 years ago. And I find this actually interesting because one would think that over time with that kind of supernatural research, as you could deem it, into these topics, you'd think that the material would be more and more refined. You would think that it would be more and more accurate insofar as that can be established within a spiritual system. Instead, there's a heavy focus for many people on older works. Very much the case in the literary perspective. Now, I'm no hypocrite. I like old books too. I much prefer, especially if we're looking at the anthropological side of anything with religion, culture and mysticism, etc., any sort of supernatural studies, I prefer things roughly from what I identify as the occult golden period as far as the research side of it goes, which is you have to have critical thinking on a modern order, so you're talking post-enlightenment. But you have to be pre-modern because then otherwise you start getting a lot of political messaging in these works. Social systems that have nothing to do with the genuine occult start seeping in. They start influencing what people are writing about. That sort of happens around the 1910s and 20s. So I identify everything between. So the ass end of the 1700s through effectively the 19th century and into the dawn of the 20th, I identify as the occult golden period. Well, the newest works there are 100 years old, just to be clear. The oldest far older. This is the case for medicine. If I'm looking up works on alternative medicine, I prefer it to be post-development of organic medicine, so the semi-standardization, the decent scientific rigor of the early 19th century through the end of that same era. Again, roughly contemporary 1920s, 1930s. There are still a hell of a lot of alternative medicine works. Later on, you start getting a lot of fad dieting and things like that. I'm not saying that was absent early on. It was more rigorous. More of an attempt was made to actually have a standardized system that was being worked with. Over and over and over again, regardless of the subgenre, you get a difference between the modern and the old. This is the case for dream interpretation. Try matching up dream interpretation from any of the divinatory works that I wrote, even in the early 20th century, that I've edited rather, and try matching it up with the 1,000 different lists of dream interpretation you'll find on the internet. That's totally different. There's also a nostalgia inherent, and I don't see this as a bad thing myself as an editor and as a bibliophile, for actual physical copy books over digital. I think that is more helpful. I don't look down on people for being bibliophiles, again, myself being one, but it is a form of nostalgia really now, isn't it? People are tied to their phones so often these days, or reading books on them, although I don't see how that's healthy for your eyes. Reading books there and carrying them around in their spare time and not really focusing on the meaning much. You're not really gleaning as much spiritual wisdom as if you're drawn up in your chambers by moonlight reading the ancient tomes. This happens to be a good opinion in my opinion. Also, aesthetically speaking, we'll return to that briefly. There's something more cozy about the older style books and the content there anyway. The spooky can be spookier. The research can be more, even the wording is strange. The way in which people wrote back then, especially when you get into the Blavatskyan era, The common hyphenation of words in order to create ulterior meanings, because a lot of the authors were German, for example. You get Steiner's work as a great example. Manly Hall, Blavatsky herself. Annie Besant delved into this for some unknown reason. You start getting works that are more New Agey in the New Age sense. And that, of course, is a century ago. It's old school. It's a little bit more comfy than stuff that's written in the 70s or the 80s where you're getting references to electronics and shit like that. Basically, that seems to be why that preference is made. On the obverse, though, there are people that are like, fuck that old shit. You know, I want everything to be digitized. I want everything to be postmodern, etc., etc. That has its problems, too. I think that there's something to be said for a little bit of the old and a little bit of the new with regards to spiritual study. Speaking, of course, of my own spiritual beliefs, I am spiritual. I believe in supernatural things that go beyond the mundane. I'm not a believer in religion, just to be clear, and I'm apatheistic and don't care about the deity issue because it can't be known. Or at least people who don't claim it can't be known. It can't be known. Some of them claim that they can, but they can't prove it, which is very interesting. Atheists do the same thing in reverse, just saying. I have a little bit of occult nostalgia, I would say. I do prefer something that looks look with Gothic lettering and stuff like that. I like the fancy trim, even if it's been fully printed through digital means. The look, I like works that are like that. I like the older style of writing, too. The dense academic, almost theatrical at times, or extremely dry and post-academic sort of material, especially from the middle of the 19th century, just trips my trigger. So yeah, a little bit about the concept. I engage in it a little bit myself, but it's good to be aware that you're engaging in nostalgia. Don't worry, though, I don't have any real-life nostalgia because growing up poor in the 90s wasn't as fun as if you were in the middle class, I believe. That's about all. Peace out.